You're listening to the last in the series, Christchurch Escape podcast, Castleford's premier faith-based conversation, at least that we know about. We're looking at Jonah, an odd little story that asks some big questions. And we couldn't get the experts, so we might not get to all the answers, but if your week could do with an honest, hearty conversation about what it means to have faith and hold the Bible, this might be the place for you. In today's episode, we talk about compassion, tough love, and why God didn't ask the Ninevites to be circumcised, and what that means for us. We really hope you enjoy it.
We've made it. This is it. This is the party episode. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah. Well done. Well done.
The end is nice.
You're still listening. The end is nice. Welcome to the final podcast episode, Jonah on the Couch. And because it is the final episode, we've got a room full, literally full of people.
We couldn't get anybody else in.
No, although we should give it a try sometime. We'll try and get more people in here. So we're still in the church office. It is warm. I can attest to that because Paul's taken clothing off. I'm not even going to say what clothing. Paul's taken clothing off. It is warm. We have Paul, obviously, myself. Joe's in here, Ash is in here, Jude's in here, Craig's tucked in a corner still. He still hasn't said a word.
Hi.
There you go.
Got him in for the last episode.
That's all he's allowed, though. Stop making noise.
Back to work.
Just looking for a credit. Certified Apple trainer Craig Golding is in the corner. We are. Paul spoke tonight, and Jude wasn't in tonight, so we get the chance to go. Paul, what on earth did you talk about tonight?
I was in with the kids. I think I always like to qualify that in case
why?
people think Ash and I just like Skype occasionally. Just go, not this week, guys. Sorry.
It's okay if you do, isn't it? Let's make that clear. It's okay to just not come to church.
But I would like Paul. If you had to give me your sermon.
That's just a nightmare question, isn't it? What did you speak about?
I love giving it to you.
So it's where Jesus reflects on how his life is Jonah come true, if you like. Jonah's the prototype, he's the real thing, and trying to draw some lines back to Jonah from Jesus and some lines from where Jesus is to where we are, and the implications. So
that is a good summary. That's a good summary.
There we go.
Yeah.
Succinct enough for you, Joe. Because you like it in a sentence, don't you?
In a word.
It said a lot, but actually didn't say anything.
Yeah. If anybody else wasn't in the sermon, you can of course listen again to that. That is available in the podcasts. It was Luke 11. I'm testing my memory now. 29 to 32.
29 to 32.
29 to 32. That's as much as I'm going to remember from the sermon tonight. It was good. It was a good sermon. I feel like I have to say that now. We've got to rate every sermon. Are we in agreement?
It was fantastic.
Yes. Joe's nodding. I'm making sure that's voice.
Those 3 lines that I heard, best sermon ever.
I mean, it's all relative, isn't it?
Sorry,
At least in the last hour.
yes.
Well, it was closure, wasn't it? It's a sermon that brought, in terms of, so the premise at the start was that we talk about Jonah and get to Jesus at the end. And you kind of, in all the sermons, the flavour is always Jesus, and to differing degrees we went straight to Jesus, but it's where the Bible sort of pulls together very clearly. And Jesus says,
talking about Jonah,
when the people say, give us a sign, and he's angry, he says, well, you've already had the sign. So it's a big punctuation mark in the whole Bible text. Jesus clearly goes, this is an important thing. This is something that you do well to get your head around. So it was nice to sort of, as Paul said at the start, join the dots up.
I remember when we were doing the planning for this series, I actually got a little bit giddy, which is probably sad, but true. I got a little bit giddy when I realised that we were going to end Jonah in Luke's Gospel with Jesus talking at the beginning of Advent.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, it's perfect. It's all come. I love when it all comes together. I mean, of course, we know this every week, don't we, when we study the Bible? But how it happened to this time with the weeks corresponding and how we split up Jonah, it seemed like a really beautiful thing that the kind of mad, crazy story of Jonah was somehow going to get us ready for Advent. Like, how amazing is that?
You're just trying to steer this towards Christmas, aren't you? Christmas talk, so we can get back to Paul's Christaberg
Confession.
Yeah, was it a confession?
Definitely not.
I was with it. Yeah, it was. I thought that it's a good tie in. Like it's a nice, neat set. Well, I was talking to Boyd afterwards about because he's preaching next week, and he was saying, yeah, it seems almost like a planned segue, like going really nicely into Advent. So, which I had never tied Jonah to Advent, but yeah, it does seem to have worked that way.
I think it's the first time we've included from something from the New Testament in an Old Testament series. I think we've always got to the end of the series and then say, right, okay, that's it. We've done it now.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever gone into the future and tied it
Preached
back in. That
the
was
Old
great.
Testament from the New Testament,
Yeah,
as it were.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Well, it was a great idea.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, actually, you're claiming ownership of that.
No, I can't claim the credit for such a well-organized... Well, I don't think Jude would even claim the credit for it being at Advent, but or maybe she would. But it was Jude's. It was Jude putting the lines
It was
together.
almost like
for
it
this.
was planned.
Almost.
I thought it was really interesting to see the way that we still had people that were lost. I mean, I don't know when that penny dropped for you in your preparation, Paul, this week when we realised, oh, we're dealing with the Ninevites. They don't know their left hand from their right. Jesus is standing up and he's still looking at people who don't know their left hand from their right. And then that lovely acknowledgement that that's when God is most... When we drift away from care at that point, oh, these people don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave them to it. God's concern grows. I thought, oh, that's a lovely continual story through the narrative. The Ninevites didn't know their left hand from their right, and it makes God actually want to speak to them in a gentle but strong way. And then Jesus comes round again. And then I don't think you made this point in the sermon, but where my mind went was, well, crikey, it seems odd, but actually we still don't know. Well, maybe you did at the start. You still could look at the human race and say, actually, there's still a lot of lostness in, that we still don't know our left hand from our right, and it all still definitely, it definitely all still applies.
Yeah, well, you linked it to that, to the other passage, Matthew passage, the hapless and the helpless.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's always there, isn't it? Aren't there always people?
Yeah.
They're always the hapless and helpless. Sometimes it's me. I think.
Yeah.
Those
It's
things.
a human condition, isn't it? It's kind of...
Yeah.
That's where we always are in some way or another.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know, what do we think that Jesus specifically speaks, or we hear when we actually acknowledge we're lost? Maybe that's part of it. We go through life thinking we're not lost.
Yeah.
Because you said the Ninevites wouldn't have known, if you were to ask them,
They wouldn't have thought they were lost.
They wouldn't have identified as people who were lost. But actually, from a bird's eye view, or even from a historical view now, you'd say, oh yeah, they were pretty lost.
Yeah.
And that is a bit of the human condition, isn't it? Oh, we're pretty sure that we are found.
Yeah.
Actually, if you could rush on 100 years, or elevate up 100 yards or whatever, you would look down and say, oh, actually, no, still pretty lost.
Yeah.
And then the beauty that God looks down and doesn't dismiss us. He goes, oh, actually, yeah, and I still care.
Yeah.
About
like the other passage where Jesus is looking down on all those people and it says, just looks on them with compassion. Doesn't look on them and judge them for being hapless and helpless, and doesn't get overly cross with them or disappointed in them, just as compassion, which
does refer to them as a wicked generation.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you think like they would have taken umbrage being compared to the people of Jonah's day, knowing what we know about the Ninevites and the kind of things they got up to?
So, spoiler alert. Mind you, you've all heard it, apart from Jude. I think what Jesus is speaking about there is prophetic, because ultimately the real connection with Jesus and Jonah is in the 40 days that Jonah preaches and the 40 days that Jesus bears witness to his resurrection. And the wickedness comes from the rejection of that sign.
I wasn't expecting you to go there.
No.
But I feel enlightened.
There you go.
So, sorry, but how did you get to that kind of place where you're thinking about that?
The 40 days.
Yeah, because you didn't hear Jude.
I didn't hear.
And other people might not have heard that yet, but
So,
explain the 40 days.
where'd you get to in terms of starting to think about that? Is that just because we're linking up number patterns in the Bible, or?
So Jesus says, you've already had a sign. and the sign is the sign of Jonah. So he's trying to get the people to think, well, what was that sign? Because there's two elements, I think, and certainly the Old Testament spoke to the people who heard it at the time, but it also speaks over time. So certainly the one element is the message of Yahweh for people outside of the Jewish nation.
Mhm.
And the message of Jonah is God's sending it for the Ninevites.
Yeah.
And Jonah's anger is actually reflective of the people as they are in Jesus' day. They still think it's just for them,
Yeah.
compared to this bigger perspective. But Jonah declares the message after coming back to life in figurative sense. He comes back to life
Okay.
and declares that message for 40 days. Jesus literally comes back to life and declares a message for 40 days until his ascension.
That's what I said in my head when we got to that bit. I was like, I've never seen that. I've never even really focused on, and I did feel a little bit told off by this when you said it in the sermon. I'd never really thought about the 40 days.
You said as well
Jesus
that
preaching after
we
that.
don't make a big deal of the
No, it's true, we don't.
Maybe is that
I think because
specifically our denomination, or is that?
No, I think it's just because there's very little record of what was said.
happened?
There aren't like the words of Jesus. So many other stories are really popular because, you know, he said to them.
Yeah.
Whereas that's just okay. And then after he was resurrected,
Mm.
he went around and broader than, you know, just with the disciples.
And that kind of interpretation would give a lot more weight to the account of Jonah being in the fish as a death and resurrection experience. Much more, it fits much more with that, doesn't it, than Jonah being like just in the little fishing boat in the fish's stomach, because we kind of.
But
Which was actually my last one in this
Yeah.
series.
Yes, it was.
So,
That was the last
I've
time you were in.
But I think even if you don't buy into that, I think that's still, whether it's a literal death or whether it's a spiritual death and resurrection,
Mhm.
either way, like
Neither
that
matters. Neither matters.
Yeah,
The
just
fact
the-
is, it's talking about death.
Yeah,
It's talking about a death, and then a prophet that lives after death,
yeah,
who brings a message from God
Life
and a
experience.
new life.
Yeah.
And actually, the people who hear the message of this risen prophet Jonah
yeah.
get to live. Actually, if we hear the living message of the risen Jesus,
We get to.
we get to live.
Yeah.
There's so many ways in which that 40 days to me becomes really incredibly powerful.
Yeah, those patterns, the number patterns. I mean, I always question how we should read into those, or whether it is just patterns. It's just there to be a pattern. Just for every generation, it's just a really simple sign that, do you see? Like, do you see this has happened before? See, this will happen again.
For me, I think the fact that Jesus speaks specifically about this generation, and there is something greater than Jonah. It doesn't say someone greater than Jonah.
Yeah,
It says something greater than Jonah has come
yeah,
or is to come. And so I think it really speaks about this generation is going to be the generation that witnesses my resurrection
and still doesn't believe.
and still doesn't believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
I was just thinking in terms of what we were kind of began that conversation, we were thinking about God speaking to us, or God leaning in when we don't know where our left hand. Do you think that is that something we're comfortable with, that almost we need to be almost more lost to find him? Is that like, is there a quantity of lostness that there can be where it's easier for God to speak? Like,
We have a biblical pattern of, Jesus revealing himself to little children, don't we? Saying things like, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick.
Mhm.
There is a foundational principle of recognizing your lostness as a approach to the gospel in Jesus' teaching, but quite how lost you need to be to find it, I don't know. I guess that depends on the individual.
Is it not recognising? I think they mentioned this in the sermon about the sign people
But-
need a sign. Do you not need to at least know that you're lost? Is that part of the message where you go?
See, I don't know. 'Cause, like, this might be reading too much into the story of the Ninevites, but I get that they were lost from a macro point of view, from God's point of view, but I see it as a different type of lost, like as if taking the wrong path. They're still on a path. They still think they're doing the right thing. They're clearly not. But by some measures, oh dear, who did that? By some measures, they're still like they've got they're on something. They're following something. They are by some measure successful, I guess. And then it's only when Jonah comes
they
to
are
the dead,
amongst the most successful people in them.
yeah, in terms of slaughtering people, really, really good.
But then
But
that's not going to stop them from seeing that there's a lost, that they are lost
Yeah.
of sorts.
Yeah, or at least realizing when somebody comes and says to them, "You're going to be destroyed," then yeah, they must have had some little inkling of that this doesn't seem quite right. What we're doing now doesn't quite seem right.
There was a bit of a setup, wasn't there? We've talked a little about there were certain like natural disasters and stuff occurring that were making them think. Do we understand that from the history, eclipses and that kind of stuff?
Some of the commentaries that I read
They were a bit worried, weren't they?
said that they'd had a bad time. They'd had a historical bad time of it. So they were people who were looking up to the skies as if to say, "Well, what's the reason behind it?" As ancient peoples did. I mean, people still do that a little bit, but as ancient peoples did. And at least the commentaries that I read said that the 40 days would have resonated anyway. That's a significant number. We should. So some of the stories of the Bible or of other ancient epics had these 40-day warnings within them. So it would have scared them into action at least.
Okay. Yes, they were kind of ripe for
being change.
Being told.
I think as well, the God of the Hebrews would have been known in the sense that, well, not known, but the idea of the Hebrew people having this God that they worshipped that was the unseen God, the God that isn't a statue or an idol or whatever it might be, they would have been known as a people. And I think that's the powerful thing is Jonah's identity as one of God's people, one of Yahweh's people, would have been known when he went into Nineveh. And so what they're acknowledging, amazingly, just by Jonah's words, is that Jonah's God is going to destroy Nineveh. And that's for some.
So the penny drops for them. This God has to be taken. We have to take this God seriously now.
So I think when you talk about did they know they were lost?
Yeah.
I think it's no, they didn't. But suddenly they're confronted with their lostness.
Yeah, it is. I mean, to take the allegory step further, it is like somebody coming up to you on a path and going, "No, this isn't the right. Like you should have gone there."
And
exactly
then
that's some realization of
suddenly.
Yeah.
And Jesus says the same. He says to the Pharisees, I've not come for those that are well, but I've come for the sick." And paradoxically, he's saying, you think you're well, but actually you're sick. And the people who've responded to me, you think are sick, are actually the ones who are now well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was reading the verses before the verses that we looked at tonight. Just for context, I was just reading back through those while you're preaching. It wasn't because I was bored. I was just looking for further context. But the fact he's just been speaking about the house divided, and then he goes as far as to say, better those, more blessed are those who hear the word and obey. Like it's not enough to have the word. It's not enough to just spout it to each other. We need to actually obey it, do something about it. Like the Ninevites then do, is they hear it, and like we've spoken about in previous podcasts, they just seem to very, very quickly do something, even if it's not an approved something that, like, whatever
what should we
legal
do?
something is, they just do. They just act. Like again, going back to the sailors on the boat, just cry out, just have a response rather than.
I think that's really amazingly gracious of God. There's nowhere in the laws of God's people that all of the animals should
No.
fast.
Yeah, well, we've
But they're like, I'll tell you what,
This is what we do.
do that.
let's not allow the animals to eat either.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah,
But it's
they
there.
must be wicked.
Well, actually, it speaks amazingly about God's graciousness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a genuine response.
Yeah.
What happens over time is, I suspect, that they got to understand more.
Is it a pointer to the new thing that God's doing as well? In that the people get saved, they don't have to go and they're not proselytized. Jonah doesn't come actually. Right now, that's a great step. But now let me tell you about
Yeah.
Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll sit down
Yeah.
because you're going about it all wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, the storyline doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we've got to put all those things together. I
Yeah.
think there's almost a sense in which change is an important part of it, but actually it's a sign of the new thing that God's going to do. So that everybody listening to the story around the Hebrew campfires has to go, oh crikey, what's this? Why do they not have to do A, B, and C like we did? And that story sits in the back of their minds then for the rest of what God does, because God does those kinds of things, doesn't he?
Did the Ninevites get circumcised?
I think I wouldn't have started with circumcision if I wanted a revolution. leave that to the end.
There were fairly famous apostles who did, though, weren't there?
It started with.
Went straight to I think you all need to be circumcised as well.
We'll start here.
Otherwise, you're not a proper believer.
It's going to sort the.
Where were you going to go for there?
Why is it going to start? Ash? Why is it going to start?
Oh yeah.
Care to finish that sentence?
The men from the other men.
I didn't actually have a place to land. I set off down a path that I didn't have a name.
That is not going to be the word of the week, by the way. Okay. What I do need to ask about the passage from tonight, because you skipped over it in the sermon, quite rightly, because I don't think there was time to unpack it, but I want to unpack it now. Queen of the South, other than a football team.
That's the first thing I thought of it.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
I had.
Football team.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at you. You tell me.
I do feel like Queen of the South is a Scottish football team.
Yeah.
From where?
That's outrageous.
From-
Scotland.
No,
Who cares who else?
Is it like Inverness or something like that?
With the Scottish foot, nobody knows.
Oh, Ash.
Slash Cairns?
Inverness.
No,
Well, the
that's not
one
true.
Scottish,
Misses an opportunity.
the one Scottish accent is actually asking, "Is it a Scottish football team?"
You need to have your.
A football fan, so
Currently 7th in League One
Wow.
of the Scottish.
where are they from?
Hang on, I ain't got that far yet.
All right.
Dumfries.
Oh, of course, I should have
Right.
known. The South, Queen of the South.
What was interesting though, as you said,
The
it was like don't think about orange penguins moment. Do you know that idea? So when you said we're not going to talk about this verse, and
Everybody.
Everyone.
we're not going to talk? Is it controversial? Is it because we don't? You know what is it?
It's actually because in Luke it has that bit in the middle of the Nineveh and Jonah story,
Yeah.
and in Matthew it leaves it to the end.
Doesn't? Oh, right. Okay.
But Jesus says the same thing, and he's basically saying, I think, both the Queen of the South is Queen of Sheba, who comes to visit Solomon, and hears and responds, it seems, and it's
a greater than.
it's the condemnation to that nation,
right?
That something greater than both Jonah and Solomon have come, and you're not responding in the way that the responded.
Right. Yeah. It's a slap in the face for the rejection.
In my theological ignorance, I couldn't remember. I mean, I kind of assumed from the text that it was the Queen of Sheba, and I assumed that, I think, she had some sort of repentance as a result, or some new wisdom, but I couldn't remember. So what? Somebody please fill me in. What? I have to look up the whole story.
She comes to recognise that there is something greater than just Solomon in Solomon.
Okay, so she's
acknowledging, I think, that there's a greater power behind Solomon. I can't bring it to mind exactly how deeply that comes, but I think it starts with that acknowledgement,
right?
Which is the condemnation for Jesus's generation, that she acknowledged, and you're not acknowledging.
She got it.
That's kind of where it is.
So she saw how wise Solomon was, and all that was happening in Israel, and she said, "Oh, this is great, but for it to be like this, there must be something behind this." But she was a pagan person in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's the contrast that Jesus is using those two events for is somebody outside of God's people are responding and God's people are not responding. So
it is so often how people find faith, though, isn't it? When they see the church, or they have a Christian friend, or they hear a bit of a story and they say, "Oh, this is great," but there must be something. There's something behind this. That's
I thought you were going to. I thought you were going to say that people come to me going, "Ash he's really wise." Actually, there's a greater wisdom.
No, it's not that. No,
it's my wisdom greater than the wisdom of Ash Gibson.
There is even than that. Even than that.
Each of your kids should have that on a t-shirt.
I've got I have got those t-shirts.
So it's really clear that the message is the Israelites, you're God's people, and Jesus saying to them, you think you're God's people, you've seen this sign, but actually you're not accepting it, just like the Ninevites. Is this just a direct challenge from Jesus just to Israel, to the people of Israel, or is this for us?
So to me, the only way that it becomes for us, to some extent, the fact that the Ninevites repented and followed Yahweh makes no difference to us, apart from Jesus's words that the Ninevites on the final day of judgment will future condemn this generation.
Yeah.
So suddenly something that happened in terms of repentance 2,500 years ago.
500 years before Christ.
That suddenly that becomes something which is significant for them. Nineveh becomes significant for them, not for the past, but for the future. So we could then say the generation that rejected Jesus are an indication for us as well, that there is this this dual response. On the one hand, the Ninevites responded and will condemn those who didn't respond.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the generation who didn't respond to Jesus will also, in that future judgment, it asks us the question, where do we stand? Are we standing with the generation of Jesus, or are we standing with the Ninevites?
Does it mean as well that in our own times that we will be condemned, as it were, by people from the past who turned? And will we face will people of today, I guess, I think I'm taking it on the right, the next step, will equally be put in their place almost as people of years in the past, who turned to see Christ, or return to God, seeing the revelation of who he was. Even in all our wisdom and all our progress and everything else, will we similarly stand condemned down the line?
Will that be a pure joy of heaven to meet people going, I thought they were so lost, and actually they were found,
they were actually found.
Yeah. Or they belong to a generation that we condemned as lost, or and actually they're just.
Is that like an exhortation to persevere with that person or persons in your life that might be causing you some headaches, perhaps?
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't want always to hear that exhortation, to be honest, Joe.
No.
Well, you walk straight into it.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Why is that how you take it? What do you think out of that message?
In a very rudimentary, simple way, perhaps. But I think we've touched on it in previous weeks, haven't we? Kind of, the Ninevites weren't the people that you wanted sat next to you. They weren't the people that you thought were worth God's time. Yeah. They were a representation of the worst people you can possibly think. So when we are faced with similar such people, with the task of putting forth the gospel, it's sometimes not easy, is it, when the rubber hits the road? But we have an example and a pattern in Scripture of these are the people that God goes after, and so must we.
Yeah, perhaps. In whatever way, whatever the message is.
I think that was, I mean, when you were preaching the other week, Joe, there was definitely that idea of a God for everyone, wasn't there? It was a God for the wicked Ninevites, for the everyday person of the Ninevites, because I think you talked about it for being from the ground up, didn't you? That the message got to the king, and then a message for simple sailors. Sorry to diss the sailors. Maybe they weren't so
I'm
simple.
not saying sailors are simple per se, but these particular sailors perhaps were
Appeared
of a simple
be.
nature, as the narrative dictates.
Because
Thank you.
put any of
Thank you for those qualifications.
put any of us on
Helpful.
put any of us on
Before
a boat, and we'll find out how simple those sailors are.
Before we start getting tweeted by a bunch of angry fishermen.
Your podcast's great, but your nautical appreciation leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, so I'm kind of I think it's interesting that that Christian response of, I'm sorry, because I think we've talked about this a little bit, but just that Christian response towards the lost. I think they are the worst of people sometimes, the people who don't know the left hand from the right hand. But then I do think the lost also does look like the child who comes in faith to God. It also looks like the person who's just poorly, who just runs out of being able to do life on by themselves, and needs that help and that like
As Jesus said, hapless and helpless.
Yes.
That's the
yeah. So I think there's not one definition for lost. That
No.
like this is the neat
Because we
Yeah.
get on our high horses pretty quick, don't we? As the
Yeah.
pound, and we put the people we pigeonhole them and say, "Oh, these are the lost."
Well,
God help the lost people. But actually, there is when Jesus came, he had a different lens. Yeah, we look at it and go, "It's those. It's that group of people there that's lost." Let us condescendingly see if we can teach this lost bunch the wisdom of the gospel, so that they might become like us. And Jesus looks and sees a whole lot lost.
Yeah,
a whole
it's
group more lost people.
we go to the extremes. I said I go to the extremes. If you look for the worst of people, you're looking for the wicked. You're not looking for the hapless and helpless. In the same way that you might look at the story of Jesus and his preaching and think, oh, the Pharisees are the lost there, and yet Jesus is looking down on a crowd of possibly thousands of people and going, hapless and helpless, all of them, everyone lost.
And at the same time, he's calling them wicked.
Wicked, and yet with compassion.
And yet, yeah, it's
So-
kind of, you're a wicked generation, and yet there's crowds listening to him.
Yeah.
Probably not, certainly not from what we read, being aggressive towards them, towards him. But I think what's at the heart of his comment about wickedness is that, it actually says, the measure that gives me the authority to say that you're wicked is that you demand a sign.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign is, when we demand a sign of somebody, I think what he's saying is, you're actually saying, prove it to me. That's what's behind it. Is, okay, you say you're who you are, prove it. And he says, I don't need to prove it, because you're still going to be wicked, even when a dead man rises. You're still not going to believe.
Yeah, we will get back to this in a minute, because I think that's a deep mine to go down. But if you've got this far, and you may have heard Jude's phone making a noise, which is probably to notify of the Ocado delivery for whatever treats
Ocado?
Ow. Yes. Yeah.
Fancy.
It's
Sorry, no,
actually-
Don't rise to it. Don't rise to it. It's worse if you rise to it.
The exquisite produce that we have at cafe.
That is what I was going to say.
Yes,
so
thank you.
that your free treat this week, if you have made it this far, is what, Ash? What festive?
I
I
was
haven't checked the Ocado delivery yet.
Yeah.
half a panini.
What, you can't go tight?
Oh, for panini.
Well, I'd give the world away, wouldn't I, at cafe? So I'd say you could have
Yeah.
a cake and a coffee.
Cake.
Give me the cash. Every week it's bigger and bigger. Wait, cafe stuff's from Ocado. We're going to make our costs meet.
The word is sign. Right. Well, I do want to get back to talking about as in terms of signs and wonders, because I'm interested in that, like the various people we touched on it last week. I think in terms of how some people are spoken to, and who God chooses to speak to and show these things to.
That's right. That was a
That was a
question.
good question last week.
Yeah. Well done for saying that. So in terms of the signs and wonders and Jesus saying here, like you've seen it, you are about to see it. What do we think about I'm going to go back to the fairness of that and who God chooses to show these miraculous things to and who he doesn't. Because in this situation, this is Jesus saying, and I'm not gonna do tricks for you to show that I am
Who I am.
God. Yeah.
And yet there are
And yet
signs
there
and
are
wonders.
times when he does do that.
Mm-hmm.
Which sometimes I think I'm guessing for a number of people listening, you go, it does seem a little bit unfair. Like,
Mhm.
1,000 people here get to see the magic trick, and then these don't, and so they all question it and go, yeah, well, when I'll wait till I see for myself.
He's God,
And
he's God toying with us.
and going all the way as far as like Thomas doubting, and then still Jesus choosing to appear before him and go, okay, here is some proof for you, so now believe.
Or when he was in his hometown of Nazareth, he goes, I'm not going to bother doing like,
Yeah, not here.
yeah, you guys have had it. And not here. You're
Yeah.
you're beyond the peril kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a question that lots of well-intentioned people would ask.
Yeah.
People, not even people that are trying to dismiss faith, who are trying to poke holes in it. People who are trying to find faith would say, I don't be wrestling with this idea. Well, why does God show himself here to these people?
Yeah, and I know
in
people
this way.
I know of people who have asked for that as well. Like really, really, they will profess that, and I know I don't know the authenticity of that, but they will profess that they really want to believe. I just need a sign. I just need something.
So
I just need that fleece to get wet, and it'll whatever it is.
I think the only thing I can do is glue a few thoughts together, because fundamentally, I don't know why some people get to see.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, this is not me asking as if anybody in the room is going to go, well, the answer
No,
is.
no,
But I guess
it's-
these thoughts that we've come up
this is the kind of context, isn't it, to ask that kind of stuff, and helps stretch the brain. So I think there's a few things to glue together. Paul says that there is sufficient evidence of God's majesty and glory and character in the creation all around us.
Yeah.
It's not enough to save us, but I think it's enough for us to go on a journey of searching.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I see in Romans. Paul is saying is that there is enough for any human being in the history of the world to start on a search for something more than what we see around us. And I think what I deduce from that is that God values those searchers wherever they are in their context. Then the other thing is, somebody asked almost the same question, and it was about the idea that this tower the Tower of Siloam fell on people and they were crushed.
Yeah.
And the question was, well, were they evil or were they good? Those people who the tower fell on. And Jesus' answer was really powerful.
What wasn't conclusive, in a sense, you might.
Well, it wasn't conclusive, but it was really conclusive.
Wasn't what they wanted to hear.
It was, yeah, definitely, because he said, never mind.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about them. What are you going to do with my message?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the only place that we can get to, is whoever asks that question, if they're asking the question, what about other people who haven't heard about Jesus?
Yeah.
Then they've heard about Jesus.
Yeah.
So
I take your point.
The issue then is don't worry about those things that we can't get our head around. Kind of leave that with God. But the issue is, what are you going to do with Jesus?
Yeah. So what if you're one of those people who's going, I'm interested,
Yeah.
right? But Show me a sign and I'll be there. I'll like,
So the whole of the Jonah Jesus narrative is the sign. And the sign is somebody who gets nailed to a cross, who dies, who's put in a grave, who rises again 3 days later and returns to heaven. That's the only sign that the whole of the human race needs.
right.
That's it. We don't need any more than that, because fundamentally, Paul says everything rests on that. If the resurrection isn't true, then your faith is meaningless.
Yeah.
So I think we often fall into exactly the same place as these people who Jesus challenges, where he says, you're asking for a sign. You've had Jonah. You're going to get another one, which is me, with me rising again. What more do you want?
Yeah.
And I think that's stark, but it's actually, I would always encourage somebody to say, forget about all of the questions that we can't answer. We need to decide which side of the fence we're going to try to answer them from. We can either answer them from the side of speculation and cynicism, and I'll only cross the fence when I've got the answer, which is like a sign.
Yeah.
Or we say, I'm going to believe that Jesus, and I'm going to carry on bringing all the questions, but fundamentally the Jesus that I believe in is one that I can actually leave those questions with as well if they don't get an answer.
Yeah. And I get that. I'm speaking as somebody who's the latter side of the fence, who I've bought into it, but I know
Thank you for
that.
It's taken 7 podcasts.
Buy into it and be baptized. I think that was the. But I do absolutely know that there'll be people listening to what you said then going, well, then that's just like that, but through that lens, from that perspective, that side of the fence, you're just gonna believe anything. You just swallow anything. If that's your perspective, if you're starting out with a point where you just go, look, I just believe that Jesus was who he says he was. And also I get that would be coupled with going, yeah, that it might be that his death and resurrection is a sign to those who saw it, but then for us afterwards, it's just potentially it's just hearsay, second-hand information, third-hand.
But so was Jonah getting swallowed by a fish.
Yeah.
And going and preaching to the Ninevites as a dead man living, figuratively speaking, or really speaking. It's exactly the same principle.
Yeah.
You had that sign back there and you rejected that sign.
Yeah.
I think what we fall into the trap of is becoming quite polarized. We end up saying, if I step over that from a point of believing in the resurrection of Jesus and claiming Jesus as my savior, therefore all of those questions don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
I think they really do.
I'm glad you're saying that, because I think that is the case. Some people think I've got to I've got to trust, start believing, if you like, and then it's just got to, and I must just reject all the questions I have about the Bible, about faith, about other Christians, about humanity.
Totally. But I think the church has created that environment where it's almost created an environment of don't ask that question.
Yeah.
Don't ask that question. That's a terrible question to ask. Just believe.
Yeah.
I actually think that.
I think it's the combination of the environment that church has created and the environment that we've created as humanity, where we want to be God ourselves and know all the answers, and the kind of dual components of that, of church going, you can't ask that, and us going, well, I want to know the answer. That kind of creates it never gets solved. You just chase after it.
People will, on the faith search though, will often find themselves in a point where they'd say to themselves, and this is maybe the way to think about it, I'd rather see a leaf fall down with a beautiful sunset behind it that I can attest to God. So I don't think anything's beyond our God. Drawing our eye to Him in whatever way. But I think at the same time, it looks to me like the text always says to us, actually, the thing that you need to pin it all on is here. There's a whole bunch of ways, a whole bunch of things that can happen all along the way. And you might end up, and maybe this is where some of the wisdom is, you might end up just looking for the sunset where the cloud comes and it does this thing. And
The cloud spells out.
and actually, you can spend your whole life, looking for that or pinning things on that. But actually, God may well bring us some real peace from His creation, and He may well speak to us in dreams and visions and those sort of things. But God, it seems to me, says, right, what you really need to figure out is maybe it's which side of the fence you're on, which which I think is right, but it's a difficult question for somebody who's a thinking person around today to not be cynical about. I think that could be a lifelong wrestle for somebody who's looking for faith to go, actually, because we're saying there we're not dropping the questions.
Yeah.
But equally for us to go, right, because same as you, I'm a believer.
Hey, two of us in the room.
I start from this,
speak for everyone else,
and
actually.
I do work from them, but I can sort of appreciate that that's a hard thing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I think Pilgrim of Tinker's Creek or something like that. Annie Dillard writes a book where she's seeking, and she looks. So many people look for the creation to be the thing of beauty, and the reality is when you get right down to the harsh, horrible reality of creation, it's formed in tooth and claw, I think is one of the phrases that she uses. The creation as it is incredibly violent. We all watch the Attenborough type of programs, and we're all rooting for the little cute deer that isn't going to get snaffled by the lion or whatever it is. But that's the reality of creation. And I often think, if we're looking for something of calm beauty, where do we go? Because the more we drill into what we think is there, that same weather pattern that creates beautiful sunsets creates tsunamis and weather events that are catastrophic. And you take God out of the picture, they still exist.
Yeah.
All of those things still exist. They don't go away.
Yeah, they're still happening.
We ain't got any hope. Is there anything outside of this?
Yeah.
Is our sort of predisposition to question and to wrestle sort of indicative of our being made in the image of God and being built to look beyond? Is this a too big a question?
No. I think it's a fair question. That's something I often wrestle with, whether that's part of the fall. Like, I sometimes wonder whether that pursuit of knowledge is the very thing. The story of Genesis is
I think you were
pursuit.
suggesting it was a gift.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting it's a curse?
I see it more as a curse, but that might just be because I feel more thick every day. The more I learn, the more pathetic I feel I am, and I think that's to me the story of the fall in Genesis absolutely speaks to that people trying to understand the mind of God is just a pointless task, and it will just lead to misery and destruction and sadness, because we'll never grasp that. But the fact that humanity has started down that route, started to try and be very clever and knowledgeable, it's like we're not actually doing ourselves that much. But going back to what I said further, that doesn't mean therefore ask no questions.
Surely totally. Because I think it's about where our feet are planted as to where we ask the questions from. Actually, I think there's something very dignifying about humanity, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding and truth, and it's what makes us creative. It's what makes us industrious. It's what is redeeming to some extent the world. It's what we're made to be like, but it's what direction we use it from. So theology was considered one of the sciences at one time. And natural science was all of the idea of understanding the world as it is in its kind of physical reality in the light of God creating it in a particular way. And we've moved away from that. That's kind of what we're saying, that our particular geographical and cultural context has moved away from it, and there's other parts of the world that have moved towards it who were never there in the past. But I think where we are, we've kind of stepped away from it, and actually we haven't got any moorings now.
Right, what were your thoughts, Joe? You think it's
I got too engrossed in what Paul was saying. Yeah, I think
you
touched on it a little while ago. I think there is a certain despair, perhaps, in knowing that we haven't got all the answers, and the more we dig, the more we realise we don't know. But is there something also quite liberating in that as well, that we can rely on a creator and we have a hope that says that he exists outside of what we can logically understand and quantify?
There's not many happy nihilists, but there are a couple who seem to have. Ricky Gervais, I think, would probably be a nihilist who says, you need to it means that you're surrounded, you just live in the moment more, and you can cope with the fact that there's no meaning outside of that. He seems to be okay with it, but I think a lot of them historically have been quite depressed, quite sad about everything. But
I mean, it's devoid of ultimate hope, I would say. It might be happy. Ricky Gervais might be happy in the here and now.
Yeah, but surely you can only be happy in the happy moments. Like, you can't be happy in
knowing that everything is finite and everything outside of that is.
I think it's okay to push back against that perspective, though, and say, but our minds yearn for so much more, and find so much more meaning in things, than that. And I think that, I mean, even depends where you look at it. The finding would point to God, but I think even, as you said, I think even the fact that we ache and yearn for more would take you on a journey towards a higher power.
Something like C.S. Lewis talked about it a lot, didn't he? There's an intrinsic part of us that is, it reacts differently to when a relative dies than to when one of our pets dies, because there's something inside of us intrinsically inbuilt that says it's not supposed to be like that. And we find ways to rationalise it, and the Ricky Gervaises of this world might say that we just enjoy the moment. But really, if we're being honest with ourselves, and we all yearn for ultimate hope. Is that fair to say?
I think it's okay for us all to be different as well. Actually, for some people, it don't need to try to answer questions. It's not their character. It's not who they are as people.
Yeah.
They can find joy and beauty in things, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But maybe their grappling is what's ultimate beauty, what's ultimate joy. My own kind of temperament loves complexity. I love the idea that we're trying to solve nuclear fusion, and God put a sun in the cosmos that's permanently powered nuclear fusion. It's kind of, I tell you what if we could recreate the sun? That would be amazing. And that is it. That is all human ingenuity, is always piecing together what already is.
Yeah, well, it's bound by laws that already exist.
Correct. God is the creator ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Yeah.
Which is the comfort for us all ultimately.
Yeah. Laws that have been put in place by someone or something. Yeah. Before we wrap up, because I want to talk about the language that Jesus uses, saying to people that they're wicked. Is that without going down the route of
can real love not be tough? Would that be the answer to that? Would that be the kind of thing you have to think about? If you really love somebody, can you lie to them? Can you hold back the truth from them? I guess when Jesus speaks, he's able to show them real love, but also he always speaks with truth. It's not what I do.
No, it's definitely not what I do. But I also, I don't know enough to know the full depths of translations of Jesus.
Yeah, come on, Paul, what's the
precise.
that.
But why?
For the word wicked.
Jesus doesn't seem to mince his words. It quite often just cuts to the quick and says plain truth, but couples that with compassion, with some action.
I think there's always a different. There is a context of speaking. You can use language which is far more direct and far more challenging when you're speaking to a whole gathering of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually when you see Jesus engaging on an individual basis, the times when he really gets confrontational is with the Pharisees and scribes who are confronting him. Whereas he's incredibly compassionate even with people who are rebellious when he's one-to-one.
Yeah.
He's speaking to a whole gathering here,
Yeah.
and I think that lands differently. But
Does that land better though? Because I would have thought if somebody's speaking to a whole crowd just calls everyone wicked, I'd be thinking, that's a sweeping statement. Like that person next to me I know is more wicked than I am.
But
I'm not pointing at you.
He's not commenting on their personal attributes, though, is he?
Would they not take it that way?
He's defining what wickedness is, though. He's saying because they didn't accept the sign of Jonah, and they won't accept the sign of me. He's defining what wickedness is,
right?
And I think we shy away. I mean, in a really crass, kind of really pathetic way. And it's probably 15 years ago when X Factor and all of that kind of thing was at its peak. It would have been really, really kind for some of their family members to say, "You are rubbish at singing. You cannot do it. Don't go on TV." That is a kind thing to do. And equally, I want to see a sign that says don't go in the water, there's crocodiles, which was actually an event in Australia where tourists went into a river and were attacked because they ignored the signs. There is a point at which that's a bit like a general statement to a whole crowd because it's not specific. But actually, if you see somebody going into the water, you want to say, "You're an idiot, don't go in there," because you will be in trouble. It becomes the criticality of it becomes more pointed, the more important it is for each individual. So Jesus is willing to use really pointed language because of its criticality.
Is there a who gets to say it element as well? So in terms of if I were to say to my kids, I think I might have license to say to my kids on occasion, "Oh, that's really..."
They are wicked.
Well,
yeah.
Or somebody that I know that knows that I love them, that I've shown that I love them. Whereas if I just went out onto the streets outside Escape now and shouted out, "You're all wicked," I think when Jesus speaks,
They go,
it's so clear. Well, yeah, but it's so clear that
we did go all the way there.
when Jesus speaks, it's so
So dignified up to now.
with love, isn't it? When he speaks, he's so clearly like, this person's a good person, and he's come here because he's got love and heart for the community. So I think there is an element of we don't all get to rush out and tell. We called to tell people the truth, but we're called to tell people the truth in love. And I think some of that is how well do we know? Have we earned the right to say this to this to this person? If we haven't, how are we going to think about how we might tell that person? But Jesus is he's there. He's earned that right, so we can say it.
And that's we actually, I think I said it tonight. We all need a saviour who is able to speak with two voices. One that is warm, comforting, and inviting, because there's times when we need to hear that. And we also need a saviour who's willing to say, "You need to just stop." And that behaviour is wicked.
Yeah.
And it's rebellious, and you need to repent. That's a loving thing to do.
And Jesus was right. I guess you look back and you say, "Oh, God was right about the Ninevites."
Yeah.
When Jesus looked out at the people condemning on the cross, he showed them love, but he was, he was right when he went round to speak to the Pharisees, and he's right. So there's something we can trust about that.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully this chat's prompted some other questions and comments. So if you do have anything to say, then please keep it clean. But please do get in touch via email at hello@xchurch.org.uk. Have a good week.